And welcome to SOFcast. I'm Mike Lundstrom with my co-host,
Master Gunner Sergeant Chance Stanley.
and we are here with another special guest for you, a special individual to us here at US SOCOM. He is a Sergeant Major from 3rd Group, currently at Special Warfare Training Group at Special Warfare Center. He just was inducted into the Commando Hall of Fame and is here with us today. Please welcome Sergeant Major Matt Williams. How you doing?
Doing good. Glad to be here. Appreciate the opportunity. Glad I could finally come in studio and sit down with you guys. So looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, we're really excited to have you here. If you would, just to kick things off here, tell us why you were here today. What happened to you today? Sorry. What happened to you here today? Yeah.
Extremely fortunate and humbled to be inducted into the Commando Hall of Honor, along with I believe 7 other Medal of Honor recipients, and then several members of the SOCOM community that are outstanding, amazing human beings that I'm fortunate enough to get to share the same space with for a brief time this morning. It's an extremely humbling ceremony. Got to see some folks I grew up looking up to, which is a crazy thing to be inducted amongst their ranks, but got to take part in that.
So just for our audience, I left it out of the intro, but he is a Medal of Honor recipient, and there's a bit of a story back there, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about his background, his history. He was here on SOFcast before, so he is a repeat offender. If you want to see more on that one, go back to episode 21. I think that was probably
Season 2.
Season 2, probably, yeah. Season 2. So just for our audience, though, and we'll kind of get into some of you're bringing it back today, but let's go back in the Wayback Machine, if you would, a little bit, and just talk a little bit about the story that led up to you receiving the Medal of Honor.
Okay. So I was assigned to 3rd Special Forces Group upon graduation from the Special Forces Qualification course. Assigned into the group in October. I think October 3rd, 4th-ish, and we were in Afghanistan about 14 days later on my first rotation over there. And so started 2007, roll around to April 2008, we got assigned a capture kill mission of a high value target in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. So we were tasked with our Afghan commando counterparts to fly in, do a raid on a village, hopefully, and capture kill the target, and then, exfil. Really nothing outside the ordinary for what we've been doing for the whole trip. We had the first operational Afghan commando Kandak that trip. So we got to fly all over Afghanistan and stay pretty busy. So we got the mission, did all of our planning, rehearsals, everything, and went off to infill. Woke up super early, loaded the birds, and we got stood down for weather for a couple hours. So after that, we waited around, and finally the mission got called back up. So we infill a little bit later than we wanted to. Fly in, we had a Apache escorts, a few Chinooks carrying about 100 Afghan commandos, and then my ODA, roughly 17 folks. We were a little bit beefed up because of the mission that we had. So we fly in, Chinooks come to a hover, and the first thing I remember is we walked to the back of the ramp and looked down. There's about 10 feet of air between us and the ground. The helicopters wouldn't land because the river bottom that we were landing in was too rocky, basically. It's kind of too treacherous for them to land on. So we started the day off by jumping off the back of a helicopter. And you can imagine what 120 times that looks like.
Risk level starts going up.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and people just spilling all over the place. So we gathered ourselves up, got in our formations and moved out. So the village we were going to assault was on top of a mountain. Obviously don't explain to you guys, but that's a terrible way to start a mission. Not a tactically sound plan. Unfortunately, though, just due to kind of mission analysis, the way it looked, that's what the plan was. Hindsight being 20/20, a bunch of other things, but we proposed a bunch of opportunities and options, and that was really looked like the best deal for the day.
Sometimes you got what you got.
To frame that for our audience members who haven't been in a situation
right.
like that. So the insert doesn't go necessarily to plan, right? Whatever rehearsals you did, that they weren't replicated on the ground. That's exactly right. Then you're moving up a steep slope with all your gear, plus you're trying to wrangle a bunch of your commandos, right? Which is an event in and of itself, and then you're attacking a superior, by elevation position, right? Which tactically is not the best place to be in.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. So we make our way up to the village. We're basically broken down into 3 elements. We had our lead assault element, our C2 element in the middle, and then our trail element, that's where I was located with our medic, team sergeant. I was assigned the heavy weapons squad that day. So we're moving up, and about the time we reached the middle of the valley, our lead element had already made its way up the terrace mountainside to the mouth of the village. That's when the whole valley basically erupted. And it was very strange acoustically from our position, because we were down in the bottom. It sounded like we were basically being fired at from all sides. So we had mountains to the back and to the front of us.
So you're in the village, right?
We were in the river bottom below the village. We didn't even make it to, so my element hadn't made it to the mountain itself yet, to the mountain itself yet. So we were still in the river bottom. And that's when, RPGs come raining down and
everybody had the high ground
fire. Yeah, exactly. Machine gun fire, RPGs, so due to the sound and the heavy weapons fire that was taking place, it was really hard to kind of orient what was actually going on. And so as we were trying to do that, the first thing we hear on the radio is that one of our guys had been hit in our C2 element. The first guy to be shot that day was Dylan Bear. He was hit in the hip. So, like I said, the medic was with me. We only had one that day, and that was Ron Schur, who also received the Medal of Honor for this action several years later, which I'm sure we'll get into in a bit more detail. But Scott Ford, our team sergeant, called Ron and said, "Hey, we got to go. We got a wounded guy." And I yelled at Scott, like, "Hey, I'll come with you. I'll bring my guys." Like I said before, I had the heavy weapons squad. So if nothing else, I figured I could at least try to bring some firepower up there. So we make our way across the river, up the mountain, and we get to their location. By the time we got there, we had now taken 2 casualties. So Dylan Bear was shot in the hip. Luis Morales was shot in the ankle and grazed a couple other places, but mainly the ankle while he was actually treating Dylan. So they nailed down our C2 position pretty well, and we're concentrating fires on that location. So we get up there, and Ron, first thing he does is immediately gets to work. It's really one of the most impressive things I've seen, and it's a true testament to our 18 Deltas, our special operations medics, and how well they're trained. So he sees both these guys, basically triages them as quickly as possible, and then gets to work on Dylan, who had the most life-threatening injuries. And then basically starts employing other guys. We actually had a combat cameraman attached to us that day, Mike Carter, and Ron was putting him to work, and he was getting after it. His camera was shot, I think, 5-10 minutes into the deal. So he was, his job now became assistant medic because we didn't need a combat cameraman anymore. So we get up there, we start doing that treatment, and Scott Ford, my team sergeant, and I, and our captain, Kyle Walton, we start looking around and trying to figure out what our best opportunity is going to be next. And we plan to try to get a foothold in the village, establish a foothold in the building, whatever we could, and then fight out from there. So I made my way back about halfway down the mountain to wrangle up more commandos and get guys in line to basically move the casualties down, and then we were going to go in the village. While I did that, Scott Ford and John Walding were both shot basically right after I left. So our lead element had pulled back to the C2 element, and they were all together. Big strafe bullets came through and shot Scott in the chest, in the arm, John in the leg, in the shin, and basically amputated his leg on the spot. So now we're up to 4 American casualties in the same location, which the enemies obviously identified pretty well. So when I heard that Scott and them had been shot, I made my way back to their position, looked around, and Scott was the most mobile. So I gathered him up, helped him down, and passed him off to one of my other fellow 18 Bravos, Seth Howard, who took him back down the mountain there was a kind of a building, a small goat pen actually, that had some cover and some shelter. So we were going to try to consolidate casualties there and then make our way to the village the best that we could. So as we were doing that, we continued just taking rounds from pretty much everywhere, and those guys are pinned down pretty good. Really the only thing that kind of kept them alive and in the fight at all was our combat controller, Zach Reiner, did an excellent job just keeping rounds on the enemy, dropping bombs, over and over again. So Seth and I reconsolidated and tried to get those guys on the radio several times, and after quite a long period of time, we couldn't get them anymore. We lost comms with them. So we had a little quick conversation. We basically feared the worst. We assumed that either, more people were dead or they were all dead or whatever. We weren't sure 100%, but had no comms with them anymore. So we agreed, hey, we got to go back up and get these guys no matter what. So me and him had that little conversation. We looked to our Afghan commandos. My heavy weapon squad was still up there. Looked at them, told them the plan. Hey, we're gonna make our way up there. We're getting these guys, and then we'll go from there. 3, 2, 1, go. We take off, and then it was just Seth and I. The commandos decided they didn't want to join us, which is fine. So we started to climb up. And my second time up there, I'd seen the ground was literally, it's like somebody had taken a dirt rake and just raked the ground up. It was so many bullets had been, come off the ground and everything. So I knew we couldn't go that way. Fortunately, we were able to kind of climb hand over hand and scale laterally the cliff face, and we reached the little outcropping that was there, and made our way up around behind where our guys were. About the time we got around there, started yelling for him, and Kyle popped his head up. They were good. They were kind of dug in where they were. Everybody was still doing well, treating casualties, but the radios were broke. Kyle tossed me the SATCOM radio, and I was fortunate enough to get that back up, and we were able to make comms higher again and carry on. And while we were doing that, Dave Sanders, 18 Charlie, found a route down the backside of this mountain. So we began exfilling all the wounded, gathered up all the commandos that were up there. We had a couple wounded commandos and an interpreter who was killed early on in the fight. Got them down. We were able to exfil off the backside of the mountain. Medevac came in. We loaded the casualties. They all took off. So shortly thereafter, we were able to consolidate, get accountability, and move off the objective. Got home, and all 4 guys lived. They're still doing great. Dylan's got a new hip. John's got a new leg. Luis has a new leg. Scott's doing pretty well. And extremely fortunate that, we were able to get everybody off the mountain alive. We lost 1 interpreter and 1 Afghan commando that day, but other than that, it worked out in our favor the best that it could.
Wow.
So that's just so that we can sort of put ourselves a little bit there. It took you, a few minutes to recount that story, but this firefight and these actions, they were spread out over hours and hours, right? And I think that it's hard for us to appreciate that, the initial firefight starts and you're running and gunning and you've got your adrenaline pumping and all that stuff. So you're doing what you're trained to do,
right,
and what you felt was your duty and what's right and all that. But over time, adrenaline can only take you so far, you know what I mean? So, and then you're physically exhausted from moving up and down, and you're also wearing probably 60 pounds or more of kit, I would assume, at least, like radios and ammunition and the plates, and all that kind of stuff. So, what was that like? It wasn't a quick, 15, 20 minute thing and then we're off the X, right? Yeah. This is hours.
Yeah. So, exactly. It ended up being, 7-8 hours total, I think. It's funny to think back on it. It strangely doesn't seem that long most of the time, because like you mentioned, the first things first, it's, you have that initial shock, adrenaline rush, and then it's collect yourself, figure out what's going on. And for me and for us, for that team, we had trained a lot. So I got to the team and they were extraordinarily well prepared. Scott was just one of those guys. He was a hard charger, believed in training for the fight, obviously, which was the right thing to do. I learned a lot about that from him and carried that throughout my career. So exactly, training kicks in. But the biggest thing that we all kind of understood was that as a collective, we knew what each other was supposed to do. We knew what we were supposed to do, and we had the ability to trust in each other to do those things. But as you move through the day, the emotions obviously ebb and flow, right? As you get to a low point or there's a kind of a stall in the action, that kind of brings everything back to perspective. The biggest thing that I focused on the most, and I think I learned a lot about myself, from this was, it's chunking out and solving problems, problem by problem. It's not, the worst thing you can do in a situation like that is let those low points get a hold of you and throw in the towel and be like, they got us, it's over, whatever. Instead it was, focusing on, hey, look, what is our situation? What problem do we have? Let's fix that problem and move on, as opposed to worrying about, it's what do we do to the enemy, as opposed to, feeling sorry for yourself because what's being done to you, right? So that was the biggest thing that I really realized in hindsight that kind of kept me going. Obviously, you got wounded guys. That's they're coming off the mountain. That's that's that period, right? So there's that intrinsic motivation there that you've got wounded brothers in action. You've got to go up there and get them. But then it was just making sure that you didn't, you're not overcome by events. We talk about these things in all of our selection processes and all that stuff, watching people go through them and learn and see how they mitigate stress and, are they overwhelmed, whatever. So we're selected and trained, based on our ability to handle those things, and we're trained how to handle them even better as we progress, in our careers. But I think that really stood out as the biggest thing that really helped propel, all of us through the day,
Did you have, this happened, like I said, pretty early in your career. You were a sergeant at the time. Mm-hmm. Was this your first big gunfight, firefight, or were there a couple of smaller ones that sort of inoculated you to what that was like before the big one? Yeah, no,
so we'd, like I said, we had a really great mission that trip. We had the first operational Kandak, so we flew down to Kandahar for a while and did a couple missions there. We we're pretty much all over Afghanistan. So we've been in a couple little firefights, nothing crazy, but that definitely took the edge off, right? The first time you hear that bullet crack wasn't
fight or flight response.
Yeah, exactly. You there's something to be said for experience, just like anything else. You experience it once and then you understand it and you can work with that a little bit more. I think that's a very, interesting question and outlook. If it had been the first time, what's that like? And how would that have changed things? Fortunately, we'd been able to get a little bit of experience under our belt and move through those things on a smaller scale, which really led to us relying on each other, relying on our training and getting through, one of the most, one of the worst ones.
Awesome. Yeah, it's amazing. Just thinking about, and I'm reflecting on some of my time in Afghanistan as well. Fortunately, nothing quite as chaotic or catastrophic as that. But I do reflect back to coming in on Chinooks, in a river valley and having the two birds land approximately 100 meters apart and having RPGs detonate right between them.
Right.
And it only takes one little event. To change, and the entire thing could have just unraveled, right?
Right.
So you never think about that at the time, but later on, maybe you reflect back on how close you were to, having things end much differently.
Absolutely, yeah. It's this event specifically, kind of being thrust back into it. It kind of constantly comes up, and you always want a Monday morning quarterback. This move this, do that, blah, blah, whatever it is. And it's always interesting to pick those points out where you see that, one little thing could have changed the outcome drastically. At one point, Seth and I were in our position, and we'd actually been there probably a little longer than we needed to be. Well, clearly longer than we needed to be. And the enemy maneuvered on us, unbeknownst to us, until we get a strafe of bullets that, went literally right between him and I, and we're basically in this proximity, 3-4 feet from each other, and a strafe of a machine gun fire just rips right in front of him, right between me, and right up the side, by your face, and just those little kind of things are like, wow, it's insane how quickly that could have changed. Obviously, it changed everything. But if you're almost fortunate enough to experience some of that, you get a different outlook on things too. How fortunate you are to get to continue to sit here and talk about it.
So you come out of that, day's over, everything's back, everybody's back at the FOB, if you will. How does that affect you? What's going through your head, and how are you dealing with that? Yeah,
it's something I've still kind of think about, trying to remember. I very vividly remember, we weirdly enough, we had to stop and fuel up helicopters at one point, and all we wanted to do was get back because our wounded guys they beat us out, and that was what our biggest concern was, checking on them. And we stopped at a fuel point and saw another team, and people had been listening to it on the radio, and it sounded pretty rough. So kind of getting their initial feedback and having those initial conversations was kind of eye-opening, like, wow, that was a bigger deal than I felt like it was. But once we landed back in Jalalabad, I remember standing around, and that was, first question, how's the guys? And then kind of dusting everything off. And, I think one of the things that we had to focus on to take away from us focusing too much on the negative in ourselves was our wounded guys. So the first thing we did was dump our stuff and then go. They were still at JBAD at the FST there, so we were able to go check on them. And I think that was almost an uplifting experience, just to see, like, hey, they're still doing good. These guys are treating them well. Nobody's in a real overly, concerning, life-threatening situation anymore. They were bad off, but it looked like from that point forward, as far as I remember, that everything was going to be good. So I think that kind of detracted from the possibility of, sitting going back to your room and closing everything off and then, dwelling on it. But there was, I've got a dark sense of humor. Ron has a dark sense of humor. And Ron Sure and I.
It's not just me.
Well, and it's in the community, right? Like it's kind of one of those things too. And, Ron and I actually got in trouble almost. Our sergeant major, the company sergeant major, had to come talk to us. I think it had to be a few days later, just about how, not even being negative, but we were just being a little bit dark. We were already prepping for another mission, and that was the goal: get us back on the horse, kind of realign the team. We had another team coming in to help us out. We were going to go get back out, and Ron and I had a pretty grim outlook on that one, just being kind of boisterous about it, but almost trying to be half-hearted and jokingly, as well.
Mechanism.
Yeah, and I think, getting back to the point, I think that's what it was. Like, that's the way we handled it. And I literally the company sergeant major had to come by and tell us to knock it off. We were like, sorry. But I think that was really the way that we handled it, was just focused on, there's a lot of things to do. Aside from gathering equipment and getting accountability of everything, but we had more missions on deck, and it was kind of focused back on work and move on.
How much longer did you stay out there after that incident?
So this happened in April. We redeployed, if I remember correctly, about a month later.
So quite a bit of time.
Yeah. So we had some time. We were able to, like I said, reorganize the team a little bit. We did some training. Did another, I think, one more operation, and then went back, relocated back to our home, kind of where we were staged out of. And there was rip time, basically. So,
yeah, that's crazy. So So you redeploy, you reconnect with your organization, and now you're moving forward of this event. At some point in time, you get recognized for your team does, your cohorts do as well. So talk to us how that process happened.
So it was hard for me to see this as a young guy and relatively inexperienced that it was a big deal. But people basically immediately kind of thrust it into the spotlight and made it a big deal. And I was getting calls from friends that heard it on the radio and all kind of stuff. But anyway, we were, started talking about awards. And it was kind of settled on silver stars for the majority of the guys that were in it the worst. And so that's what happened. Literally by, I think, October of 2008, the team was awarded. We did our big back from the trip award ceremony, and by that time we had 10 silver stars awarded to the team and attachments, and then an Air Force Cross to the CCT Zach Reiner. Mike Carter, our combat cameraman, got a silver star. I think he's like the only combat cameraman ever to be awarded a silver star, I think. Anyways, it was actually pretty quick. It was a big thing. Friends, family. General Mulholland was the youth SOC commander at the time, and he did the award ceremony himself. So it was I'm starting to understand it as a bigger deal. Mm-hmm. But once that settled, again for me, it just kind of went away. I went back to doing what I was doing. A few of us were still on the same team. The wounded guys were going on and doing their thing, and the story kind of took off for a little bit. I think a few guys, there were some news spots and things like that, but it wasn't really for me at the time. So I just went back to my career and focused on, being an SF guy. And then, that was it. We just kind of moved on, never hear of it. And, obviously think about it from time to time. And, guys from the community, third group, if you will, kind of know the story a little bit, but it kind of, went away. We'd had multiple years of combat, a lot more, serious operations and, losing guys and guys doing valorous things. And so the whole, Shok Valley operation just kind of went by the wayside, and, we continued through our time in the GWAT until, everything changed in 2018 when we got notified of the upgrades.
Yeah, that's interesting because that's almost 10 years, right? And somebody's carrying the water on that.
Right.
Did you ever know who did that for you, or?
So I've learned more about the process, and ours specifically, from my understanding. So Secretary Carter, Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, he issued a reinvestigation for Global War on Terrorism Valor Medals, or Valor Awards, excuse me. I think he started it in 2016 is when he gave that order or whatever. So silver stars and above were basically scrubbed and selected however they do it for, upgrade or whatever.
Yeah.
It was one of those things like you see a message come through the email about it or whatever, and, you get a random, hey, update your records. If you've got one of these awards, make sure if you have any additional information or whatever is need to be submitted, then you can do that now, that kind of thing. I never paid really any mind to it. Like I said, it was just one of those things that happened early on. At this point, I was a team sergeant, so I had other things to worry about. All right, no, 2006, I wasn't. I was actually just getting back from SWIC, looking at becoming team sergeant. But 2018 is when we actually found out about the upgrades themselves. So then I was actually a team sergeant, and it was interesting. We were out in JRTC, or NTC.
Oh, that's got to be loads of fun.
Yeah. So we were actually in NTC.
I got scar tissue.
Yeah. So
I got scar tissue from that too.
We were at NTC, and Ron, who I've mentioned several times now, Ron shoots me or calls me. We weren't supposed to have our phone, so sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's only on the internet now.
Yeah, it'll be all right. So he calls me, and I text him back, hey man, can't answer the phone. And the reason I was concerned about it though was because just prior to that, he'd been diagnosed with lung cancer. So having him call me, that was immediate concern. So I hit him, text him back, hey, sorry, out training, what's the deal? And he wrote me a text that, hey, President Trump just called me in the office and told me that my Silver Star has been upgraded to the Medal of Honor. And I was like, wow, that's...
Trump called him direct, huh?
So, yeah, Ron actually worked. He was working for the Secret Service at the White House for the time.
Crazy. Yeah.
And it's a really cool story.
We're here.
Yeah, so he, his boss has Miranda. I don't know I forgot how they got his wife to the office, but Miranda comes in and he kind of, hey, I want to show you guys something or whatever, some kind of a ruse. But Ron, he knew the White House, he worked there. And he's like, hey, why are we going this way? Kind of in the back of his mind is wondering what's going on. And his boss escorts him into Trump's office at the time. And so he got to actually hear about his upgrade directly, from the president in the Oval Office. There's really great pictures of, the shock on his face and Miranda's shock as well. But
get a weekend at Mar-a-Lago.
Yeah. So he tells me that. And the first thing I thought was like, obviously, that totally makes sense. I mean, like I said, he was the only medic on the ground, had one aid bag and kept, 4 people alive, 1 or 2 of which should, may not have even should be here anymore. But he just crushed it. So I was like, that's awesome. Call you when I get a chance. So fast forward a little bit, we wind down the operation, and we're heading back home. And I call him, and he's telling me all about it, and he kind of tells me how it got started. He's like, yeah, I got a weird, kind of a cryptic email. And I was like, I got one of those. I remember back, I'd got an email from the Army, like Army G1. And it was like, hey, we've been trying to get a hold of you at this phone number. Call us back. And, me being Matt Williams, I was like, well, there's lots of us. So I emailed the lady back, that's a colonel, and I said, hey, ma'am, you must have the wrong Matt Williams. That's not my phone number. And she's like, no, it's the right one. We need to schedule time to talk. And so Ron's telling me this happened to him too. And then I'm thinking, okay, that's interesting. Yeah. And then, this lady calls me literally the day after the exercise ends. She calls me up and she's like, hey, can we set up a phone call tomorrow with a senior DOD official? And I was like, well, can you, what's it about? She said, I can't tell you. I was like, okay, well, I mean, a senior DOD official can call me whenever they want. I work for them. So,
trying to break the surprise too early, right? Yeah.
So, she's like, hey, we'll do it at, I think it was 1:00 the next day. So I was flying home. I was going to be home. The next day comes around and this, another phone call. She calls me, hey, you good for the phone call? I was like, I'm ready. I'll be ready to go. And then another number calls me, a DC number. It's like, hey, are you, is this Matt Williams? Yep. Are you ready for your phone call at whatever time? I think 1:00. I was like, yeah, I'll be there. So my time rolls around. I jump in my truck and I'm still kind of wondering what the whole deal is. And I knew the review kind of came to me and I remembered that was a thing. But no way it's an upgrade.
The real question is how many people knew before you?
Well, yeah, that's another. I found out after the fact, but
yeah,
I still couldn't really believe that it was going down that road. So I jump in my truck to take the phone call at my house, and phone number calls, and the lady on the line says, "Please hold for the president." And immediately I was like, "Oh wow." And believe it or not, the first thing I did was text my wife, like, hey, come get in my truck. So she's sitting, I can see her, she's in our garage working out. And I was like, get in the truck. And she just thinks I'm messing with her because that's what I do. And so she kind of blows me off. And I was like,
of course.
So at this point, President Trump's on the line and he gets on and, kind of says hi or whatever. And, starts talking about the Medal of Honor and what it means. And, finally I get a hold of my wife. It's like, get in here. And she gets in the truck and, just as he's wrapping up, hey, congratulations, and we'll, can't wait to see you and your family at the White House. And my wife looks at me, she's like, what is going on? And, she knew about Ron's story. So she's like, well, maybe he's just calling to welcome the team to the White House, And I was like, no. I was like, my award got upgraded to Medal of Honor too. So mind you, we were dating at the time of the Silver Star, but that was it. She didn't really know what the whole deal was, and it's not something obviously we didn't sit around and talk about it. So her first question to me is immediately, what did you do? So now I have to try to explain to her the whole story.
Yeah, now you got to bring reality to life to the spouse, right? I know what that's like.
But so that's that's how it all happened again. Changed everything. I guess for the
it's just life changing, right?
Yeah.
Trump doesn't call everybody. My point to all this, right, especially for the audience, is how rare this is. Exceptionally rare, and the feat and the things that happen behind it. Most of the time, you see these awarded posthumously, right? And this is not the case. This is real life. It's a younger version of yourself, and you're going through a tremendous amount of combat, and the valor behind it, the saving lives, the recovering of the teammates, and just carrying the water and all that. It's incredible. Absolutely incredible. And I don't think it can be understated in any way, overstated in any way that, short of the Medal of Honor. So that's an incredible story. And I appreciate you sharing that with us. I want to kind of move to that post situation. Now you're master sergeant, now sergeant major, and you're in the formation, you're leading the formation, and now you have a leadership target on you, because not only you sergeant major on the rank, but you're sergeant major Medal of Honor recipient, right? And people view you differently. How's that go for you?
It's definitely, it's new and it's different.
Everybody on Fort Bragg has to salute you.
Well, so they salute the medal, and I don't wear it around.
No, I got you. A bit of humor, right?
You don't have a sticker on the
back. No. I definitely don't have my plate. I don't have my ERB on my truck. No. But to that point, it's something that I was very I was concerned with that from the beginning. So like I said, I found out when I was a team sergeant, my biggest concern was I wasn't going to continue to get to be a team sergeant. And there was a lot of straight voltage around the medal and what it means and what you have to do or don't have to do. But I was very fortunate to have Ron as a mentor for a year. So he got his medal a year, actually received it a year before me. So I got to see what life is like with it through him. Obviously, I had the added component of being active duty, which kind of changed things. But I was very vocal early with my chain of command and very fortunate with who they were at the time. General Bodette and CSM Eckert specifically at USOC. And
no, Mark Eckert well.
Yeah, I had that. And so CSM Eckert was, he was my company sergeant major for a time, battalion sergeant major for a time, in the group. Yeah. So I knew I'd known him and I had that candid conversation with him. Like, look, I'm a team sergeant now. Like, all I want to do is finish my team sergeant time, and then whatever. We'll talk about the Army, what they need from me or don't need from me as a Medal of Honor recipient. And they were both awesome about it. And it really exemplified what true leadership on both their parts, because they, General Bodette was flat out, if you need me to intervene for you on anything, call me, and he truly meant that. And so I knew I had that kind of in my back pocket. I was fortunate enough to be an E8 at the time, so I was able to navigate requests from the Army and to do things as a recipient pretty well, but that also thrust me into the position of, making E9 early and a few other things like you mentioned. And so the point being, I try to just be Sergeant Major Matt Williams. I try to be Matt Williams the best I can, and then Sergeant Major Williams. And I don't, I assume a lot of people know the deal, but I'm also try to be as naive as possible and think that they don't. And that way I treat relationships, I treat my leadership style, I treat, as a company sergeant major, the same thing, and looking forward to doing this as a battalion CSM is just like anybody else. And I'm just that, the guy with the rank. The medal is something else. It's something that happened a long time ago. It doesn't make me a leader. It frankly doesn't make me who I am. All those things are different. And that's my goal.
You have innate characteristics.
I hope that that's the way it stays. But also, the medal brings with it the opportunity, to represent something that I think is kind of underrepresented and a little bit, I'll use the term undereducated, and so I have that opportunity to represent the medal the best I can, and really it's more about the folks that come before us that we've I hate to say forgotten, not necessarily forgotten, but revive some of these stories and revive some of the kind of the what it means to receive the medal, wear the medal. We have so many great, specifically in the SF, the Green Beret community, Medal of Honor recipients, that I hope just by having one that I kind of ignite some focus on the medal itself and revive some of the history that a lot of these folks have come before me have, produced. So that's kind of my hope and how that gets navigated, specifically at the battalion level, where I'll be in charge of, our student body, our student population. I don't need them all to know who I am or why I have the medal. The fact that I have it, hopefully, it kind of sparks the curiosity to look at the folks that came before, even me and who they are and why these guys' names are on buildings and things like that.
It's a great leadership nugget, actually, in an example of being humble, humility, with having such a great honor and then responsibility come with it. But you're just you.
Yeah.
Right.
I think you're trying to deflect some of that praise and spotlight from yourself onto deserving teammates, the organization you represent, Green Berets writ large, the medal itself, and something I think that you've accurately captured in your description is soft culture. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Is we're supposed to be silent, quiet professionals, right? We do our jobs. We don't search out the spotlight or notoriety, and yet because of your actions, the Medal of Honor and now induction into the Commando Hall of Honor have sort of thrust you, maybe kicking and screaming a little bit into that. But you've kind of tried to balance it, where you're still focused on, I want to continue to serve, to the degree possible, right? Mm-hmm. To continue to make contributions, ultimately to the organization, but to the nation and obviously your family. Right. So how has that been? Just trying to balance all those things and not let anything slip or slide.
I mean, it's a challenge, and it's something that it kind of changes over time. At first you're like you don't really know how to handle it. The Army, I believe, actually does a pretty good job of media training and setting some expectations onto what that's like, because they give you a medal and the next thing you know, you're on Fox News. Like, what am I supposed to do here? And they do a good job of that.
You get paraded around.
I can neither confirm nor deny. That's not how this works.
Right. Yeah. I can't just plead the fifth. But then there is the new aspect of in certain circles, people may recognize you or whatever. And really the goal has always been just to represent first, the medal the best I can, hopefully with honor and dignity. I remember specifically at my ceremony, Lieutenant General Foley came in the back room when I was waiting, and, a recipient from Vietnam, said hi and introduced himself. And one of the first things he told me was, hey, use it for good, right? And, don't just do, X, Y, and Z or whatever. Take the opportunities that you have with the medal to do something good with it. And that kind of stuck with me And I've kind of taken that to heart too. So if and when I get to put the medal on, I'm hoping it's in representation for, obviously something other than myself, but for the kind of the greater good. But, managing the family and the, relative limelight and those kind of things, it's like anything else. You just have to prioritize what's most important to you first, and then be willing to kind of stick by that, and where I am now with, a young family, it's, family for sure. Family comes first, and then I've got my job, and I owe these kids that are about to undertake the Q course, and my cadre. When I become the CSM, I owe them, my time and whatever I can provide for them, and then it's the medal. As I transition out of the military down the line, then those priorities and things that they may change. But really, I don't like to look at it as like, hey, it's me and I have this new limelight situation. More so, it's an opportunity to kind of at least spark, like I mentioned earlier, spark curiosity. Have people be willing to understand the medal and my specific work as an SF guy. Like, one of the things I try to talk about is, hey, understand our history. Use these things as an opportunity to kind of look back, understand where we came from, and hopefully, if nothing, it's sparks an opportunity for education. Because I think that's somewhere that we all, especially in the SOF community, have to really focus on, because we're, we moved into a time of relative transition. We've moved out of this GWAT thing that has become our culture and understood as our kind of livelihood and mission, and most of our organizations actually aren't set up for that.
That was actually my next question was, how are you, so you mentioned the Q course, you mentioned your current job, you're at the Special Warfare Training Center right now, and you are trying to transition these young kids, these young soldiers to post-GWAT into this competition and deterrence era. Right. How's that going?
I'm not sure yet with the students, but when I was a company sergeant major in third group, that was the company I took had just done, I think, the last or second to last Afghan rotation that third group would do, which is a big deal. But it was unfortunately, it wasn't the best experience, just because it was a lot of retrograde and all that kind of stuff. So my company commander counterpart and I, we really had to think about how we're going to approach this, because there's a lot of guys were disgruntled. They were upset that most of them joined the Army, if not all of them, to do that, and me included. We joined the military to go fight the war on terror, and for third group, that's all we had done for basically 20 years. And it was coming to a close, and so we were looking at that problem set, like, how do we make sure these guys stay motivated? We don't want to lose them. You lose motivation, especially in a bunch of A-type personality guys like us, can lead to bad things, if nothing else, right? Or just the lack of, we're just losing sheer talent when we don't need to. And so that was when I kind of really started to look at it as it really is just focusing on our history problem more than anything else. And I had that kind of conversation with most of my teams in the company. It was just, look, guys, like, this is what we're moving forward to do. It's what you signed up to do. Whether you like it or not, or want to admit it or not, like, especially on the SF side of the house, us moving forward into the kind of competition continuum and, getting out to, we're Africa aligned, so getting on the continent and, working with partners, whether that's JSETs or whatever that may be, like, that's the mission. We were fortunate to hopefully get that message out a little bit. We got guys on some great trips, some great opportunities. I think started to kind of open their eyes a little bit more than just kind of a hand wave of like, no, it's fine. This is your mission. It's important. Like, what you're doing is important. That's the hardest part, is selling guys that a 45-day JSET is actually important when it comes to great power competition or whatever we're looking at. But some of them got to see it firsthand, especially in Africa. It's pretty on the nose with what's going on there. And so that was our big focus. Like, look, like, yeah, we have to take a step back, understand our mission, understand our heritage, understand, why we were created, and we never had a real change in mission.
Right.
We just had a change in situation.
That's true.
So, that was the biggest thing. I hope, as I get into battalion role, it's kind of the same focus. So we just need to make sure that, on the Green Beret side, this is what you want to do. I think that under the SOCOM enterprise, everybody's wrestling with that a little bit and managing their identity and regaining, their true identity and figuring out where they're going to go in the future. Luckily for us, our core mission, in my opinion, will never really go away.
Yeah. We like to say the activities left of Bang, right?
Yeah.
What can we do to maintain the stability before anything the flag goes up, and I think that's where the real hard work is. I know SF brings a lot to the table for that. That's in their wheelhouse, right? So really interesting.
I wanted to talk one thing. I wanted to go back. You talked a lot about your continued call to service, right? You're getting pretty close to 20, and if you so choose, your retirement. Mm-hmm. And yet you see an opportunity provided by the medal and the Hall of Honor and things like that give you a sort of platform or some leverage to continue to be an ambassador. And I just wanted to impress upon the audience like how important I think representing your organization, yourself, to your best ability. When you get up every day, you represent a service member in the armed forces, the NCO Corps. Yeah. You put that uniform on. You're an Army soldier. You're also a Green Beret, right? You're a member of JFK SWCC right now. So all these different organizations and sub-organizations that you represent, whether you mean to or not, right?
Yeah.
And that you're using, obviously, your accomplishments and your humility and some of those leadership traits to represent those things well, but also leveraging the medal and some of the opportunities that have been afforded you now to really push those things and continue to evolve them. So I think that's, I would applaud that, and say that we don't have to be Medal of Honor recipients to follow your lead.
Right. Well, I appreciate it. Yeah, it's, I think you're 100% right. Everybody has that opportunity, and that's, I think we're, in a position now, especially with, the big talk of recruiting numbers and all the issues that we're having and filling the force and all that, like, as you said, everybody that puts on the uniform, and even after you hang the uniform up, like you owe that, you don't owe it, but you have that opportunity to continue to serve, the country by, just being a good,
citizen.
Being a good citizen, having a good outlook on what your service brought to you and what you gained from it, and being able to kind of get that out there, because it's, I've had the opportunity to, meet a lot of people, and that's a big concern. We definitely need folks. With the medal, it makes it a little bit, it gives me a different platform. But for that thing, it's such a, growing up in the military, or not, as you're a young guy, you hear about stories and you learn about these guys, and you get to meet a bunch of them, which is wild as it is, but you understand like what this really means and what came before you, and putting it on, all you can do is represent it the best that you can. You owe it to literally the 3,000 other recipients, most of which never got a chance to wear it.
Yeah, and for anybody who's, maybe a little bit disenfranchised right now with the missions, and it's not as maybe kinetic as it was. We both know that you could be down on the African continent, you could be in the Indo-Pacific somewhere, you could be engaged with foreign allies or partners, conducting foreign internal defense, something like that, in a fairly benign mission set, and at the drop of a hat, like things can turn on a dime, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, and you could find yourself in combat or some kind of conflict. So, I think it's really important, obviously, to continue to evolve and build future capabilities, but at the same time, embracing some of those legacy lessons learned and insights that 2 decades of GWAT has ingrained in us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's 100% true. That's one thing that does not really concern me, but it's something that I think about a lot. Is that we're aging out of like actual GWAT experience pretty quick. I see it now, and I saw it again as a company sergeant, even as a team sergeant. My team wasn't full of guys with 3, 4, 5 trips like it was literally 2 years before that. And so we have to ensure that we kind of codify, like you said, those lessons learned. I mean, we progressed, an insurmountable amount, with how we did combat, what our kit looked like, all that stuff in the course of 20 years, very, very quickly. My 5th trip to Afghanistan was a completely different situation than my first, and then my subsequent trips to Africa, same thing. The kit wasn't the same, the equipment wasn't the same. We learned so much so quickly in that extremely kinetic environment that we have to take those lessons too, right? We can't just let those things go. It's important, and they definitely shaped a lot of things, but that also can't be our sole focus in life either, or we'll get left behind pretty quick.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Hey, this saddens me because we are nearing the end of our podcast time here. So I want to tell you, I know on behalf of Master Guns and we really appreciate you being here, and I want to congratulate you for being inducted into the Hall of Honor. That's a tremendous.
Thank you.
And more importantly, thank you for sharing your story with us. I'm in awe, and I really, really appreciate it. I know he does as well. And just, I hope our audience, can appreciate what this means, because it's huge. It's huge. So for that matter, let's close it out.
Yeah. In closing, is there anything that you would want to leave with the audience, any piece of advice or anything that you would want to just impress upon them?
The biggest thing, we said it a few times, if you're a service member serving, we appreciate everything you're doing for the country and continue to do so. If you're a regular person listening to the podcast, the biggest thing that I like to ask people to do, and it's kind of a call to these folks that maybe services in their future, but I'll ask them to do is be a citizen we're serving for, right? So there's a million some odd folks in the military these days, and we're all putting on a uniform to make sure this country stays free and safe, and we just want to make sure that we're protecting people worth protecting, and be a good person, serve your community, do something other outside yourself every now and then, and I think everything will be work out.
Yeah, joint core value, selfless service. Plug.
Yeah, no,
shameless.
It's awesome. Hey, on behalf of General Fenton and Shane Shorter, CSM Shane Shorter, I'd like to thank you for being here today. It is tremendous opportunity for us and tremendous honor as well. For our audience out there, if you enjoyed this episode, please catch us on your favorite podcast platform. Please leave us a like or a comment. And if you'd like to suggest an idea to us, please reach out to us at SOFcast@SOCOM.mil. And thank you for tuning in.